Hello, you're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and before we begin, I sincerely ask you to subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who already subscribed. Last night, while you were all sleeping, the White House press secretary issued new threats against Russia. She stated that if a deal is not reached within 50 days, and actually there are fewer than 50 days left, then things will get bad. The harshest sanctions will be imposed on Russia and on those who continue trading with Russia. Fighting continues on the Ukrainian front, and we'll continue monitoring the situation. Let's move to the map, especially considering how things are now collapsing for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU, on the eastern flank of Mirnograd. So let's see what's happening there. And the AFU is experiencing a complete failure. A quick look at the map is enough to understand these towns are doomed. It's only a matter of time before they fall. I'm talking about Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, and Rodinske. But I'd like to start this overview from another section of the front. The Kharkiv region and the Kupiansk district, specifically the northern part of Kupiansk. Here we have the village of Milov. The thing is, Zelensky apparently got a harsh dressing down for missing the Russian attack near Milov, which led to the village falling under Russian control. Moreover, Russian forces advanced another 5 kilometers into Kharkiv region toward Velike Burluk. So Zelensky seemingly got chewed out and decided to retake the lost positions at any cost. I can't explain what happened yesterday otherwise. First, the Ukrainians urgently redeployed the 22nd Separate Mechanized Brigade here, ostensibly to stop the Russian advance and prevent a breakthrough to Velike Burluk. But as it turned out, they weren't just sent here to defend, but also to counterattack. In other words, to try and push Russian forces back into Belgorod region. Yesterday, a strike group from the 22nd SMB got overconfident and moved out from the village of Khatne toward Milov. Russian scouts spotted them here when they were halfway to the settlement of Ambane and kept observing. They entered Amban, were joined by 2 more pieces of equipment, and moved toward Belov. But Russian motorized rifle units were ready to greet these heroes. They let them pass quietly down the road and enter the wooded area. There, their movement was blocked, they were surrounded and offered to surrender. Take a wild guess what happened. They refused. You can see the end result in the video posted on my Telegram channel, so follow the link in the description and see how General 200's assault group ended up. As for the Russian side, over the past 24 hours, Russian assault troops managed to expand the control zone and advance along this forest strip toward Amban. We haven't entered the village itself yet, but as you can see on the map, it's very close. So I think combat inside the village itself will begin very soon. Now let's return to Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. But before we move to the Pokrovsk agglomeration, a few more words about the Kharkiv region, because there was progress there too, albeit small. A 400-meter advance was made in the forested area near the reservoir approaching Borivska Andreyivka. And by the way, Borivska Andreyivka is the last village before the urban-type settlement of Borova. However, as I mentioned in a previous video, the prospects of capturing Borova remain quite distant. The Russian army moves here rarely, slowly, and with great difficulty. Now let's talk about the prospects of capturing the entire Donetsk region in 50 days. Or even by the end of the year, something people asked me in the comments. I'll answer both questions at once. Neither is realistic. However, some objectives are still achievable by year's end. Let's start with one of them, Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, and Rodinske. Capturing these 3 towns is a realistic goal before the end of the year. Look, at the moment you only need to glance at the big picture map to see that the AFU is in real trouble here. The towns are currently semi-encircled, at least Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are. The latter, especially after the Russian breakthrough toward Krasny Lyman, is in dire straits. It's now squeezed from 3 sides, north, south, and east. In the east, intense fighting continues for the urban-type settlement of Novekonomichna. Credit where it's due. The AFU garrison, there is fighting like wild beasts, clawing for every inch of ground. So far, even though Russian troops are now pressing from both north and south, effectively squeezing the AFU garrison in the middle, progress remains extremely difficult. The situation is somewhat different near Rodinske. Here, the AFU regularly retreats, they simply can't hold the line. fighting is already taking place on the outskirts of Krasny Lyman. This has been confirmed by Ukrainian military experts, including Muchny. So what does it mean that fighting is ongoing in Krasny Lyman? It means the battles have reached the outskirts of Rodinske. Because if you look at the map, there's no real boundary between the village and the town. Krasny Lyman just gradually flows into Rodinske. Moreover, there have been reports that Russian soldiers already made it onto the territory of the local mine. However, I haven't yet seen confirmation that they've secured a foothold there. Now, the mine is a strong defensive node. The AFU won't give it up easily, that's obvious. But capturing the mine and the nearby spoil tip is absolutely essential. Without it, there will be no success in Rodinska. Let's now go back to the big picture. What needs to happen for Pokrovsk and Mirnograd to fall by year's end? It's simple. 3 supply roads need to be cut. 1 from the north, which the Russian army is now rapidly approaching, and 2 from the northwest, which the Russian army hasn't reached yet. The western flank of Pokrovsk remains static, and that's what's preventing the full encirclement of the entire agglomeration. If the task of taking Kharkiv were resolved, 2 of these supply routes, located very close to each other, would already be cut. That would mean Pokrovsk and Mirnograd could fall within weeks. Only 1 final supply road would remain, and once that's cut, the encirclement would be complete. But as I said, there's no progress on this front yet. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if our forces end up advancing from Novotoretsk toward Belitska, cutting off the supply route from the north, and then, without waiting for the western flank to move, making a dash toward Kharkiv. In any case, as of now, it looks like a resolution is coming by year's end, and the 3 cities of Pokrovsk, Mirnograd and Rodinske will fall under Russian control. After that, a breakthrough to the 4th city, Dobropilya, is likely. Although that's probably a task for next year. As for Kostiantynivka, people have asked whether the battles for the city will start this year. I have no doubt they will. But will the city be taken this year? Personally, I doubt it. Even though the city lies in a lowland area and should be difficult for the AFU to defend, it's still a large city with a sizable industrial zone. So I'm quite sure it won't be taken this year, but fighting for it will definitely begin. On the Dnipropetrovsk front, Russian forces are fighting on the outskirts of Zeleny High. Taking control of this area will allow the Russian army to reach the line of Iskra-Novoselivka along the Vovcha River. It's possible that in the near future, Russian vanguard units could break through on a broad front to the administrative border. On the northern front near Ivanivka and on the southern front near Timirivka, the AFU is transferring reserves in an attempt to halt the Russian advance toward Ivanivka, Filia, and also Novopavlivka from the south, fearing this development. Well, that's all for today regarding the situation on the front. Now let me share a few political updates. A massive, unprecedented airstrike in both intensity and coverage was launched on 9 Ukrainian armed forces, air bases and military facilities across central and eastern Ukraine, according to retired Colonel Gennady Alekin. Until recently, the airfield in Chuhuiv, Kharkiv region was still operational. It had been under attack since the early days of the war. Previously used by MiGs and Sukhois, it is now a depot for ammunition, supplies, air defense systems, MLRS, Vampire launchers, American M777 howitzers, and UAV launch platforms. 3 other airfields in Kharkiv region, Kurilivka, Levkivka, and Korotych, are no longer operational either. They are now used as forward helicopter pads. For example, Korotych is actively used by Ukraine's military intelligence. The Kharkiv airport in Zhikar was frequently used to evacuate foreign KIA and WIA personnel to Kyiv. Even the Kharkiv aviation plant has a runway used by Kyiv. Over the past 24 hours, Geran and Lancet drones inflicted serious damage, particularly in Chuhuiv. Last night, Kharkiv was also heavily bombarded, including the Shevchenkivsky, Kievsky districts and areas along the ring road. The sky over Kharkiv glowed red the entire night. Rural Europe is losing. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has criticized the European Commission's initiative to rewrite the EU's long-term budget and allocate €100 billion to Ukraine. A shocking leak of new EU budget details reveals a dangerous gamble. Ukraine will receive massive funding, while European farmers will suffer. This plan risks leaving rural Europe behind and threatens families across the continent. Brussels must not abandon European farmers in order to fund Ukraine, Orban posted on X. He added that the conflict in Ukraine can only be resolved through a personal meeting between Putin and Trump. He emphasized that any agreement should not only address Ukraine, but also energy prices, access to Russian markets, economic sanctions, and arms control. We urgently need a ceasefire and peace. Then we must define what Ukraine actually is, its borders, its population. Right now, we don't even know what Ukraine is, or where it is. Finally, once peace and clarity are restored, we can sign a long-term agreement with Russia and build a strategic partnership with Ukraine, one that will protect our sovereignty and ensure Europe's future. That is what we must strive for, Orban concluded. There are reports that Zelensky's hypocritical remarks about Trump are a signal that the front is on the brink of disaster. The AFU may fall into a massive encirclement near Pokrovsk and begin widespread retreats across all fronts. Zelensky is trying to win over Trump, beg him for weapons, and push for a ceasefire under the guise of a peace initiative. But everyone understands he wants the ceasefire to regroup and continue the war. Rumors suggest Zelensky is still executing the globalists' plan to drag Trump into the Ukraine crisis. In addition, it's reported that Zelensky claimed to be discussing a so-called mega deal with Trump. Allegedly, the US would buy drones used by the AFU and in return sell its weapons to Ukraine. Yet another of Zelensky's fantasies that will never happen, just like his billion trees promise, writes the Telegram channel Legitimate. Zelensky still doesn't get that Trump has no intention of buying weapons from anyone, only selling them and bringing production back to the US to strengthen America. Zelensky wants to sell outdated tech to the US that it already understands. It just hasn't prioritized such programs before. If needed, the Americans will simply poach the talent and cut Zelensky out, like they always do with everyone. All our sources believe 2026 could be a catastrophic year for the AFU. Zelensky continues to lead them toward that tragedy. That's the summary from Legitimate. MEP Karin Karlsbro called Trump's tariff policy blackmail and demanded a tough EU response. The US announcement of new 30% tariffs on European goods is not only unjustified, it's a direct attack on the EU. The Union is now being forced to yield to President Trump's blackmail. Despite our efforts to avoid escalation, the US administration has chosen threats and coercion over cooperation. Since January, the European Union has shown restraint regarding the new US trade approach. Even when the American president challenged our relationship and questioned our cooperation on peace and security, we remained calm, focused, and constructive, because it's in our mutual interest. Now we must speak and act, and use Europe's strength. It's time to speak in the language President Trump understands.